Hey folks, I'm William, this is Runeforged, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at a new free class for Shadowdark RPG that I designed for my upcoming campaign setting, Shadows of Camelot. More on that setting at the end of the video. So this is the new Knight of the Old Code class, which is very much inspired by the movie Dragonheart from 1996.
Remember the code. The king is above the code. Have you forgotten everything I taught you? No one is above the code. Especially the king.
Yes, that's Dragonheart. Definitely an amazing scene from one of my all-time favorite movies. Also, there are Amazon affiliate links down in the video description where you can either rent or buy Dragonheart for yourself if you are so inclined. And of course, I should mention I do make a small commission for any sales made after clicking on one of those links. But regardless, Dragonheart is a fantastic, if somewhat dated movie, and I do highly recommend that you check it out, especially if it was a favorite of yours growing up. But without further ado, let's get into the Knight of the Old Code class. All right, so here we go. The description says, starry-eyed aspirants, virtuous champions, or disillusioned crusaders, chasing the fading echoes of a nobler age. So yeah, very much a knight in shining armor, but very much out of their own time. And of course, very fitting for the Shadows of Camelot campaign setting, which takes place in a post-Arthurian Albion, when the Knights of the Round Table are all but myth and legend. In terms of weapons, the Knight of the Old Code can use all melee weapons, and I think I would go ahead and say that also includes any thrown weapons that also classified as melee weapons. The big restriction here is that they're just not able to use traditional range weapons like bows and crossbows, as they would consider that to be dishonorable. Now, I do know in the movie Bowen does use a bow, but we are deviating from that archetype just a little bit, and also to act as a little bit of a balancing measure for what could otherwise be a very powerful class. And of course, these knights are able to wear all manner of armor and shields, as befits a knight in shining armor. Next here, we've got Oathsworn. It says you have sworn to follow the old code of Camelot, which we'll see on the next page. If you knowingly break it, you can't use uphold the code until you atone. And really, it's going to be kind of up to the GM to negotiate, what actions might break a knight's code. And of course, they can use the old code provided here to provide some guidance for that discussion. But I think really the key takeaway here is that I think it's probably in everyone's best interest that the knight be aware that they might be about to break their oath before they take a particular action. This is not really meant to be a gotcha. And really, it should just be more of an ongoing conversation between the player and the GM. All right, next we've got the primary Knight of the Old Code ability, which is Uphold the Code. And it says up to 3 times a day, you may use one of the following abilities. And each of these abilities is based on one of the statements of the Knight's Code from the movie Dragonheart, with a minor tweak that we'll talk about when we get there. All right, so the first one is a knight is sworn to valor. When you use this ability, you can add 1 plus half your level, rounding down, to any d20 roll that you just made. And this really symbolizes the fact that the knight is so brave and so courageous that they're really able to step up in those really important moments and make things count when it's really needed. Next, we've got their heart knows only virtue, which allows them to immediately end a harmful effect on themselves. I think charm or fear effects are prime candidates for using this ability. And this is really just to represent the knight is so virtuous and so pure-hearted that he is able to shrug off effects that might cause a lot of issues for less virtuous individuals. Now, this is very broadly worded here. It says any harmful effect, but I really do leave it to the GM to figure out exactly what type of effects that this might work on. As I said earlier, I think that charm and fear effects are probably the most reasonable options for this ability to affect. But definitely let me know down in the comment section if you think this is too broad and we need to narrow it down just a little bit. Next, we've got their blade defends the weak. And this is actually an amalgamation of their blade defends the helpless and their might upholds the weak from the original code, largely because I didn't have enough space to do both. And also the full text of their blade defends the helpless doesn't actually fit on one line. And it makes it difficult to get all the information I need down on the page. But anyway, this ability says that you can become the new target of an attack they would hit a close ally. And I think this is very thematically tied to the idea of your blade defending the helpless or the weak, and allows you to really step up and be more of a defensive presence for your party or for various different NPCs that you might come across in your travels. And again, I think this is very thematic for a Knight of the Old Code who is literally putting themselves in harm's way to defend someone who is not capable of defending themselves. And I think this really personifies the essence of what it means to be a Knight of the Old Code. Next, we've got their word speaks only truth. And it says that if you say something you believe to be true, you can convince anyone who can hear and understand you that you're being truthful. Now, I do think that this is going to be kind of a situational ability, and I think depending on how the GM rules this could either be extremely powerful or have absolutely zero effect. So there absolutely needs to be a little bit of dialogue between the player and the GM about whether or not this would be an appropriate time to use this ability so that the player doesn't feel like they wasted one of their uphold the oath usages. But again, I think this is very thematic to the class and very much represents the idea that these knights are honorable and bound to tell the truth. And that because they kind of have that reputation, people are much more inclined to believe them when they say things, even if the claims they make do feel fairly outlandish. Now, I do want to point out the one very important passage here is that the knight actually has to believe that what they are saying is true in order for this effect to work. And finally, probably what's going to be the most used ability is their wrath undoes the wicked. And that allows the knight to double the damage they just inflicted to a chaotic creature. And I do think that there's probably a conversation to be had between the GM and the player about, does the player / character know that the entity that they just hit is chaotic? I am kind of the mind that it is okay for the knight to have a sense of what the alignment of the person is that they just struck, maybe as some sort of moral intuition. But if you want to play it a little bit more cagey as a GM, I think that's totally fine as well. And also, I do want to acknowledge, I recognize this ability is probably pretty powerful. So I am curious to hear your feedback down in the comment section about whether or not you think this is too much. If you think it is too powerful, maybe how would you tone it down while still keeping the flavor of the ability? And also, I do want it to be fairly strong. I think this is a core fantasy of this kind of paladin / knightly class where they are smiting evil. So I do want to keep it in some form, even if it is a little bit dialed down. But maybe you think it is perfectly fine in light of some of the other very strong class abilities that other classes get as well. All right, next let's take a look at the talents for the Knight of the Old Code. The entry for when you roll a 2, and that is once a day you get Last Stand, which says you cannot drop below 1 HP for 3 rounds. And you may also want to stipulate that maybe this ability only works when the knight is actively fighting and not running away from an enemy. But I think this very much epitomizes the Knight of the Old Code archetype, where the knight is just kind of digging their heels in and making one valiant last stand against any opponents that may be trying to bring them or their allies down. And I think the other entry on this list that is probably the most interesting is the entry for 10 and 11, which allows the knight to gain an additional usage of their Uphold the Code each day. And again, that's just one more point that they can play with to use some of their very cool and hopefully very flavorful abilities. All right, moving on to the next page here. This is more of a flavor page. So it does give you an abridged copy of the Old Code of Camelot, which, as you can see, ties directly into the abilities they have via Uphold the Oath. And we've got what I think is a fantastic piece of art here from Adrian Arduini. I hope I'm saying his name correctly, but it's this kneeling older knight, and it does very much kind of remind me of that scene from Dragonheart where Bowen is kind of reaffirming his oath. And I do like the fact that it is kind of an older knight with this kind of long mustache, which kind of invokes the image of a Knight of Solamnia from the Dragon Age series, which does tie in very closely with this kind of character class. So I think this is the perfect piece of art to demonstrate what the Knight of the Old Code is. He's not just this very awesome warrior, very well armored and well armed, and he is kneeling in service to something that is greater than himself. And I think it's something that really separates the Knight of the Old Code from like your standard fighter warrior, or even something like your sea wolf. So yeah, again, just absolutely in love with this piece of art. I will have a link down in the video description if you'd like to see more of Adrian's work, and I'll actually put a link to this specific image as well. So if you ever want to use it for one of your own pieces, you can purchase it from DriveThruRPG. All right, and finally we've got the titles for the Knight of the Old Code. Now you will notice something very interesting here. There's really only entries for lawful, and that is because this class is intended to only be lawful And if they ever were to stray from that alignment, they would find that they would be breaking their oath and would no longer be able to use their Uphold the Oath ability. And we have the different titles here. We've got Knight Aspirant, Knight Errant, Knight Champion, Knight Exemplar, and Knight Paragon. And of course, if you ever fall out of grace, you are officially an Oathbreaker and lose access to all of your relevant abilities, at least until you get a chance to atone. And again, that's just going to be a conversation between the player and the GM about what that process might look like. If you'd like to get a copy of this class for yourself, there will be a link down in the video description where you can pick it up for free from DriveThruRPG. While you're there, please consider giving me a follow on my DriveThruRPG page and checking out some of my other published content. Regardless, definitely let me know down in the YouTube comments what you thought about the Knight of the Old Code class. But before you click off of this video, I want to tease my upcoming Shadowdark campaign setting, Shadows of Camelot. And this is really my attempt at creating a compelling sandbox campaign that integrates the legends of King Arthur, as well as Robin Hood, into Shadowdark's default setting. As I mentioned earlier, the campaign takes place in a post-Arthurian Albion. I want to be very clear, this is not Britain from our real world. And it features 3 distinct regions, as well as 27 points of interest. And many of those locations will be quite recognizable to those of you who are well-versed in the Arthurian legends. There's also a new charity system, which is meant to be like a more thematic reskin of carousing from the core Shadowdark rules, as well as a ton of setting-specific creatures and magical items. And there's an absolute ton of fantastic artwork from a variety of really talented artists. There will also be both GM and player-facing version of the maps for both the region of Albion overall, as well as the introductory level 1 adventure, The Tomb of the Headless Knight. And best of all, I'm actually already in the home stretch of getting this setting published. Basically, I'm just waiting on a couple more pieces of commissioned art, and then I need to do one more final editing pass, but then I think we're very much good to go. Right now, I'm targeting a July 2025 release date, but I'll definitely be sure to keep you guys updated if that does end up changing. But yeah, I hope that has whetted your appetite even just a little bit. And if it has, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel so you don't miss out on any future updates. But I think that's about it for now. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day. Bye.